Hey, welcome back. Happy Thursday. I want to start off with a story today, a little personal sharing. I've been a priest now for 17 years, and much of that has been filled with grace. I've had some amazing experiences, met some absolutely wonderful people. Cannot tell you how incredibly blessed I've been in the last 17 years. And part of that story and part of those blessings came from a particular season when I was in the vocations office and I was living in Thibodaux with Bishop Jacobs. And I remember very distinctly one of my experiences there that I think changed my life forever. I was struggling with control. That's been kind of like the theme of my life. And that very particular day, I was also struggling with control at that stage of my life. And I don't know what the particular circumstances were, and I don't really know what in my body language cued him off. But before we would do a night prayer, as we would do every night together, Bishop Jacobs looked at me and he knew that I was off. He knew something was not right in me. So he engaged in conversation, and as a beautiful spiritual father, asked me lots of great questions. And as I began to open up my heart, we began to share. And then all of a sudden, I backed off. I kind of put up a wall, and he knew the wall, right? It was around my fear and it was around my control. Very patiently, because he had felt that kind of wall before, he looked at me as a spiritual father, and he said the following. He said, everybody's heart is like a house. In people's houses, in their homes, there are rooms in the home that they feel very safe letting people into. Like everybody's welcome in the foyer, right? The front door. Everybody kind of walks in the foyer. In South Louisiana, everybody's welcome in the living room, right? That's where you can kind of kick back and just kind of relax a little bit. And hey, in South Louisiana, everybody's welcome in the kitchen, right? That's where we do maybe our most beautiful entertaining, and that's where things are maybe safest and most authentic for us, around the kitchen table with coffee, right? Everybody is welcome in those areas of the house, the foyer, the living room, the kitchen. But most people have a room in the house where the door's closed, and that's where all the junk is. And they don't want you to see that. They don't want you to see where the junk in their house is. And Bishop Jacobs reminded me that everybody's heart is like a house. And he looked at me and he says, Mark, there's parts of your heart that are like a house. There's parts of your heart where you feel very open, letting people into and sharing, and there's parts of your heart where you let the Lord into. But he says there are places in your heart, just like people have a room in their house where that's where the junk is and they don't want people to go into that room. He says there's places in your heart where you don't want people to go because you're afraid of what's there. He says, he looked at me and he says, you spend a lot of time with your hand on the doorknob and you don't want to let anybody through that door. He says, I want you to imagine you're in that area of your heart, and it's like a house, right? And you're standing and you've got that door closed, and you don't want people to see what's on the other side. You don't want people to see by opening up that door. You don't want God to see by opening that door. And he looked at me with a great smile. He says, you think that the only way people can see what's in that room on your heart is if you open up the door. And he looked at me with a great smile and he says, Mark, you don't have a roof on your house. God sees from the top down. And I busted out laughing because that was, at one moment, the most terrifying and liberating thing I'd ever heard in my life. That my heart is like a house, and my house ain't got a roof. In other words, as much energy as I spend on keeping the door closed, God already knows what's in there because God sees from the top, and I don't have a roof. Hey, my friends, welcome on this Thursday, January the 17th, to a conversation about your heart. And here's the good news. You don't have a roof, right? All week long, we've been talking about choosing to live selflessly, right? Not for ourselves. The opposite of living for ourselves, with ourself as the center of the world, the opposite of living a compartmentalized life is for us to live with our hearts open. And for some of us, that means that we need to let God into our heart. All week long, we've been talking about letting God in, right? We talked about letting God into our schedule and letting God into our finances and letting God into our free time. And believe it or not, as hard as those things are, it's actually easier to let God into our checkbook than it is into our history. It's a lot easier to give God permission to talk to us about our free time than it is about our fear. And what we know is that if we want 2019 to be the best year of our life, we have to let the Lord into our heart. And here's the good news. You ain't got a roof, right? The good news is that God knows everything about us, and He still called us. When I was in the vocations office, I used to tell the seminarians all the time that God is never surprised. Let me tell you what that means. When I was in the seminary, I started the seminary after hearing the call when I was in high school. I certainly heard the call in college, and I heard it when I was working. And I was in the seminary for several years, and it was my third year of theology. And I began to struggle with just particular aspects of the call to the priesthood. And I was really struggling. And I remember going to prayer one day and feeling like God must have been disappointed because I was struggling. And as I brought that to spiritual director, I remember Father Hampton told me, hey, God's never surprised. And what he meant by that is he was trying to tell me that, hey, it's not like God called me when I was in college or high school, and then all of a sudden I bumped into this struggle, and all of a sudden God's like, oh, I didn't expect that, right? No, God's not surprised. And yet God still called me. See, that's the good news. God knew that I was going to struggle, but He still called me. He still called me when I was in high school. He knew I was going to struggle, but He still called me. Right? And so here's the good news. You might have some things in your life that are messy. You might have some things in your life you're struggling with. Well, God's not surprised. And He still called you. You might have some things in your life that you need to deal with in 2019. It doesn't mean it can't be the best year of your life. God still called you. In fact, maybe, just maybe, what's going to make 2019 the best year of your life is giving God permission into those places of your heart. Just want to encourage you. Here's the thing. We can't live compartmentalized lives. And if we're going to do that, we need to let the Lord into our heart. Be not afraid. Here's the one thing that you can do today. I want to send you to the Bible, and I want to encourage you to read Psalm 23. Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, right? That is the most looked for Bible passage on Google. Go to Psalm 23. Read Psalm 23 tonight. Read the beauty of a God who's pursuing you. Maybe take a chance tonight and let the Lord into your heart. Maybe take a chance tonight and let the Lord into every place in your heart. God bless you.